Most of our sessions. Oh,
We've had a request just for localization for the back because they were expecting.
oh, for this to be amplified.
Yeah, or just give it your.
To be able to hear me, yeah. Fortunately, most of our meetings will be in Namaste Hall, I think I don't know.
Which are mic.
Will it be? What's that?
It will be mic.
Which we can mic, yeah. I guess we need this open for the air. What do you think in terms of sound? That one's that side's quieter over there, right? This is the one that's really loud.
There's a buzzing.
Oh, there's a buzzing. I see. Okay. As soon as people start to asphyxiate, dropping off like flies, we'll open up the windows. So the next class, remember, which is 2 weeks from now, will be in Namaste Hall, 3rd floor, larger room. And then the way we'll do this, each class will have a break halfway through for 15-20 minutes. And overall, the structure of the class will be lecture, half discussion. That's a very good reason to be doing the reading before the class, because you'll get a lot more both out of the lecture and also out of the discussion. I won't be repeating in the lectures what is in the book. I mean, obviously we'll be covering similar or the same territory, but we want to rely on that already being in you for the class, so that we can go deeper or higher, wider, and take issue with it, etc. Both the book and these 5 lectures are a real. They're an attempt at an overview and a kind of sweeping overview. We want to attend here to the complexity of this history and to the contradictions in it, the paradoxes, the multiplicity that's in it. But still, this is very much an attempt to stand way back and kind of get a sense for the overall landscape of the history of Western thought, going back to the ancient Greeks on the one hand and the ancient Hebrews on the other, who are kind of principal root sources from the axial era. The axial era being that period in the first millennium BCE, particularly the 6th century BCE, where right across the world there was such a radical transformation in worldviews, in the human consciousness that brought forth the major world religions or made huge changes in them, such as with the Hebrews or the in Hinduism, that are with us to this day. When I say that we're trying to get a kind of overall view of the forest, not only the trees, what I have in mind is a little bit like this painting on the cover of what probably most of you have this edition, which is the U.S. Paperback edition. If you look carefully at that painting, it's called The Architect's Dream. It's a painting from the mid-19th century, the American Romantic tradition that came out of the Hudson River School. Thomas Cole painted it. And if you look carefully, I mean, really, it's almost exactly what the book's about. You can see the ancient Greek or Greco-Roman classical worldview architecture, symbolized by the architecture. You can see the medieval cathedrals, which in some sense embody the whole Christian and Abrahamic monotheistic tradition that has been our principal religious tradition, starting with the Hebrew prophets. So on each side you've got really the Greco-Roman and the Judeo-Christian, and then in the distance you can see the pyramids as a kind of symbol of the archaic Egyptian, and both ancient Egypt and or archaic Egypt really, and archaic Babylon, the Sumerian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian civilizations that had a huge effect on both Greece and Israel. They're in the background, almost kind of like a hint of it. It's kind of in the mists of very early history there, and then the whole landscape is being viewed by this person who represents, in some sense, the contemporary consciousness. In this case, it's that 19th century romantic transcendentalist consciousness that is able to, in some sense, appreciate everything that came before. So it's all there, kind of like a sacred medicine vision or an LSD trip or something in this dream of the architect. And throughout the course, we'll be working with, like this, a kind of high degree of synthesis, of generality, of summary, though always attempting to be grounded in the many particulars, based on both primary sources and other works of scholarship. This, while on the one hand we're trying to get a view of the whole landscape from a distance, from a critical distance, to kind of get a handle on it, on the other hand, we won't be able to understand it if we don't also try to see it from within, like enter into each worldview with an act of the sympathetic imagination. So this really requires a kind of intellectual and really, I would say, even emotional and spiritual openness on our part to allow another era's vision to penetrate us, to suffuse our way of seeing things sufficiently that we can look out, in a way, much as this person is here in that painting, as from within that dream. Each era is in a kind of dream of the cosmos, dream of, to pick up on a Thomas Berry phrase, and the dream of the earth. It's a way of construing reality that goes right from the most macrocosmic outermost frame of reference that we can imagine, right to the most interior of the human psyche, our self-image as individual human beings. Here goes our typical October 5th celebration of American macho militarism every year. So, sorry, we'll have to put up with that at times today. There's roots of that as well in the for ancient Greek sensibility. So we want to both be seeing this history with that critical distancing of the analytic mind, but also with a capacity to enter into other worldviews, much as a like let's just take the geocentric assumption. I think one way we could enter into that would be to think about being a child again, and how when you were little, your home was the center of the universe, right? And the next block was like another could be pretty far away if you're really little, and everything is centered on that sense of your home. And if you grew up with your parents, your mother and father, your family, in some sense they weren't just another mother and father or a couple of adults. They were capital M mom and capital, the archetypal mother and archetypal father. This is the part of that's the child consciousness. And in some sense, that's the way for everyone who lived prior to the Copernican revolution, Earth was the undoubted center of the cosmos. It obviously wasn't moving around. It's not rotating and revolving in several directions, moving in several directions at once. It's the most obviously fixed object in the cosmos. And so we have to kind of enter into that. And another kind of assumption that's very dominant in the lineage, the intellectual and spiritual lineage that has the hegemony in Western civilization, is the patriarchal assumption that is built into the use of the word in Greek, anthropos, but in English, the word man, using the masculine gender to signify, symbolize, and evoke the whole human enterprise and the whole human being. And sorry, while we let these guys go by here. I was, as I was driving here to this lecture, I was saying to Becca and Yvonne how even to this day, like when we need to use the word man when we're trying to evoke how the Greek, the Judeo-Christian, and even the modern patrilineal tradition framed the human project and the place of the human being in the universe. But it is still, even as I read the language, even like it jolts me each time that I see that word man used. And it really wasn't until about the mid-1980s that a good number of people started to become conscious of that was a tendentious way of signifying the whole human being. And even to this day, I have friends who, and you can see it in books as well, who are really fine women scholars who are my age or older, typically older, who were established within a certain vocabulary and framing of talking about human history and the human being, who use the word man, even like just someone who is one of the most significant scholars in the area of women's spirituality in England. And it's just because they got sort of socialized into that way of saying it, and it has a certain rhetorical punch. Man and God, or the ascent of man, as I know some of you are watching that video series as part of Brian's class, the ascent of man or the descent of man coming from Darwin, or the dignity of man coming from Pico della Mirandola's great Renaissance oration. So it's a kind of the reason it's there, and that it's almost necessary to encounter it periodically in the language describing a worldview, is that we can't really grasp the sense of a kind of differentiation of the human being from the matrix of nature and from the matrix of life that has a masculine impulse at work in it that climaxes in that kind of existentialist, heroic man against the absurd universe, the universe that has no meaning and purpose, but man will create his own meaning and thereby overcome the absurdity of the cosmic situation he finds himself in. So really right there from man is made in the image of God right up to the 20th century existentialist, you have a subtle image of the human being in this kind of masculine, heroic. There's a warrior archetype that's way back in the background, but it gradually metamorphoses out of the pure warrior into other forms of the masculine. And man is not just I would argue, is not just a false universal, a construct of a particular social community and vocabulary. It is also a kind of being. It's a kind of archetypal being that has possessed our civilization in a certain way. It served as a kind of constellating center that has informed men and women, even at the same time as it hasn't represented adequately the whole human being.
Rick, when you say men, do you mean masculine or no?
Say that again?
When you say men, like it's informed the whole culture, do you mean the archetypal masculine as informed?
Well, I think I was using the word man rather than men most of the time.
Yeah,
Okay, and so now the one time I did use the word men was actually when I said man and God, which is a typical, more monotheistic trope, but you also have in the Greeks of gods and men. That's a very typical, because it's theoi, theology, like the gods, plural of theos, and anthropoi, the plural of anthropos, which is men. That's a very typical trope, men and gods. So even using men was supposed to represent all human beings.
Right.
But typically, I didn't do that in Passion of the Western Mind, unless it's a quote from somebody else. But I did use the typical man and mankind very regularly. I tried to intersperse it with humanity, humankind. Humankind really didn't come much into use until really in our lifetime. So it's a kind of anachronism to put it in there, even though it's a much more decent representation. Anyway, not to get too far off, dwelling on that, but this is the kind of entering into other eras' worldviews this is the kind of sympathetic imagination that's required, overcoming our own in some sense, overcoming our own knowledge or assumptions to enter into their knowledge and their assumptions. This is probably a good moment to bring in, while we're talking about a geocentric and anthropocentric cosmology, to put in perspective what we're looking at in terms of history against the larger backdrop of big history, which is the history that goes back to the Big Bang, or as Brian would say, the Great Flaring Forth. If we were to take the whole history of the universe 13.7 billion years ago with the Big Bang, and put that into 1 year, from January 1st midnight to December 31st at 11:59 p.m. And that now is 11:59 p.m. Really, it does feel apocalyptic, doesn't it? Okay, so put that whole history of the cosmos in one 12-month, 1 year, and then get a sense for what our history looks like in that larger, big history frame of reference of the cosmos, of the solar system, of the Earth. Basically, the Earth and the solar system emerge about September. Okay, so January 1st, midnight, the cosmos starts, and it moves fast. Even in January, already the galaxies are coming, Milky Way galaxy. By September, you get the solar system, the sun, our sun, the solar system, and the Earth. All of this book, from the first, the entire history of from ancient Greece and ancient Israel up to the present, happens in the last 6 seconds, from like December 31st, 11:59, and 54 seconds. So the last 6 seconds all fits into here. All right, like 10 seconds ago, that's the pyramids. Maybe an hour ago, Homo erectus is emerging. It's just to put these things in perspective. It was only 2 weeks ago in this year. It was about December 15th that the Cambrian explosion took place of life forms that all lead to our animal and plant life today. The last week dinosaurs were dominant. Up in this week that we're just finishing, dinosaurs were dominant for right up till yesterday morning. Okay, so this is the last 6 seconds. It really kind of puts things in a more modest perspective. Now, why have a course like this when there's so many reasons why one could come up with, I almost feel like the course is being framed by a certain ambiance that is worth attending to. My generation in the 60s, I got to remember next time I schedule this course, October 5th, happens every year. My generation basically stopped reading the great books of the so-called great books of the Western world. It was part of the whole 60s kind of countercultural revolt against the establishment, against the authorities that were passed on, the canon. The canon wars really emerge out of that epoch, and the faculty members that were came of age in the 60s that later went on to teach in universities began the canon wars. I think probably in many ways there's a lot of good reasons for stopping that reading of and assimilating of the canon, related to, among other things, multiculturalism, the recognition that the Eurocentric tradition is not the end-all be-all of civilization, and that tendency to call it civilization itself has been obviously out-contextualized now by the postmodern multicultural revolution. This is. I remember we started a course a couple of years ago over. It was outside of the school, but it was over at the Fort Mason. Happened to be on the night that the Chinese New Year was beginning, and there was all the drumming and the parade, everything happening outside. And so multiculturalism, feminism, the ecological critique of the anthropocentric aspect of the Western tradition, the desire to basically change the world and not so much study the past, the return to the body instead of so much focus on mind and spirit. All of these are pretty strong justifications for letting this kind of typical encounter with the great books of the Western canon to let it go. But also, one can see that all those are also reasons why we need to know this history. Daniel Burstein, the Librarian of Congress, former Librarian of Congress, the late Daniel Burstein, who is also a historian, he said, trying to create the future without knowing your history is like trying to plant cut flowers. And if we're going to move forward, we need to really have a good sense of our roots, of what shaped the world we're in right now, and doing that requires. We want to do that both because the West may not and shouldn't be regarded as being like the ultimate in human civilization, but it is that civilization which has radically shaped the world we live in, right down to the most distant South Pacific island or Arctic glacier. Everything, every species, every culture, every form of life in the Earth community is being affected by assumptions and operating principles that were forged by the Western mind and enacted in the course of the modern era with tremendous technological and political and ecological power and consequence. Moreover, so much that is precious to us is also an outcome of that history. All of us in this room hold precious our ability to question assumptions, to be able to change worldviews from what we were taught by in our childhood, by our family, by the religion we might have grown up in, by the country that we may have grown up in, the particular nationalistic or religious set of assumptions that in another era would have just been absolutely unquestioned. It's built into Western civilization, going back to the ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews, with the prophets in the latter case and the philosophers in the former case, to be able to question the ruling conventions of that society. In other words, it's essential to our tradition to question the tradition. And also our individuality, that quality of depth of individual interiority and autonomy is something that really emerges out of the that is characteristic of our contemporary sensibility, is really something that emerges out of the modern era. And it's important to get a sense for how that was constellated in the evolution of consciousness. Now, this particular course and this book that we're looking at, that we're reading for it, was written, I wrote it for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was that the histories of Western thought that were available at that time, and to some extent this is still true, did not, I felt, do justice to the spiritual and religious dimension of Western intellectual history. There'd be a tendency to, say, cover the Greek philosophers and then just leap right up to Bacon and Descartes as if nothing happened in between, when there was a huge role played by, let's say, the medieval scholasticism. Also assumptions about the human being that are shaped by Judaism and Christianity in their different forms are really important to grasp, and to grasp not as with an automatic dismissal of this is just mere superstition. That dismissive condescension was also characteristic not only of religious authorities or religious traditions and beliefs, but also of ancient philosophers and metaphysical convictions. For example, if you would read an account by somebody like Bertrand Russell of the history of Western philosophy, he would give an account of Plato and then really not even get it out of his mouth without saying, well, this of course is a ridiculous way of looking at the universe. We know because of this, this, and this. Some of which reasons we today might not think, some of Russell's reasons might not be so compelling. And again, this is why I'm asking us to attempt to understand Plato or Socrates or Aristotle or the Hebrew prophets or the Christian theologians or Descartes, for that matter. Understand them with more like a work of art. I love that sentence from Virginia Woolf that I quoted in the preface, where she said, she's talking about literary masterpieces, and she said, the success of the masterpieces seems to lie not so much in their freedom from faults. Indeed, we tolerate the grossest errors in them all, but in the immense persuasiveness of a mind which has completely mastered its perspective. The way when we, you can read, whatever, Tolstoy's War and Peace, and you can, one could say, oh, he's got a whole philosophy of history here that I can disagree with, or there's so much this particular way of writing that it, could be considered a literary flaw, and yet the Tolstoyan cosmos is so compelling and rich a world to enter into that in order to taste that, one needs to kind of overcome the condescension of just focusing on the faults, on the things that we have outgrown. I suppose it's something like being able to view our parents and our grandparents and the way choices they made from what was available to them, and to see it from inside their perspective with a kind of it's a kind of act of love in a way that permits a deeper knowing than an act of simple critical distancing. Okay. And sometimes this is absolutely crucial to getting the history right at all. Let me give you an example that you're now familiar with from reading the section on Plato's Problem of the Planets. Okay, so it was crucial to the history of planetary astronomy, leading right up to the cosmology that we now have available to us, that now is dominant. It was crucial that Plato and the Platonic Pythagorean tradition before and after him, Pythagorean tradition before and after, and then Platonic tradition after Plato, the conviction that the divine dimension of reality was profoundly, had a profound intellectual character to it, that it was a divine mind that in some essential way ordered the cosmos and ordered the heavens in particular. That the heavens and the order that we see each night in the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon, planets, that order reflects a divine intelligence and a cosmic order that is numinous. That to understand that order is to elevate the human mind, and so that the philosopher astronomer is in some sense participating in the divine essence of the universe, and thereby redeems and elevates their life, their being, by doing that. And because of this conviction of the cosmos, or the heavens, reflecting an eternal perfection of mathematical order that had beauty and aesthetic as well as rational clarity and order to it. The word cosmos contains all that, contains that sense of order, but also of aesthetic pattern. Like our word, like cosmetic and cosmos are the same, come from the same root. Because of that conviction, Plato, it had become clear by Plato's generation of observers of the heavens that some celestial bodies were moving in a way that did not seem to reflect this perfect regular order night after night that we see with the fixed stars. As you know, if you're looking which direction, I think Berkeley's over in this direction. So the sun and the stars, the moon, each night and each day rise over there in the east, set over in the west, and there's night after night, century after century, those stars seem to obey a certain eternal, timeless order, and eternity and timelessness and order all had divine characteristics. So it had a religious significance. And of course, there's even behind that, there's this deep, I think, primal and certainly archaic human perception of the heavens as being divine, being actual gods, or being a kind of cosmic womb. The night lights of the starry sky had a powerful luminosity that we have kind of cut off from ourselves because of the powerful technological illumination of urban life, so that we don't encounter it with anything like that intimacy night after night, and it has an effect on our worldview, our sensibility, our sense of how big the human is in the big picture. Heidegger says mortals we've turned night into day and day into a state of harassed unrest. Now, because of this conviction that Plato had, and because by his time astronomers, observers could see that some planets, some bodies in the heavens were not obeying that perfect order. They seem to be wandering in other directions. While the stars are moving in this direction, not only does the sun and moon move slowly in the other direction, day after day, month after month, but also there were several other bodies, what we now know as Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, that were not only moving sometimes in the opposite direction, as the stars, but also, this is from talking so loud, excuse me, but also they were seeming to slow down at times and stop, and then go in the forward direction, and then go retrograde, and go stationary, etc. And that's why they're called planets, which means wanderer in Greek. And for Plato, this was a metaphysical and religious problem of the highest degree. He considered it, he even used the word, this is a blasphemy to even consider that that these celestial beings are really moving in this disorderly way, because he had such an unshakable spiritual conviction that the cosmos reflected an absolutely transcendent numinous intelligence. And he had such a conviction that the mind in its elevated state of rational insight was superior to the confusions and changing illusions of sensory experience, that he, with confidence, told future astronomers, philosophers, mathematicians, which were for him all one category. If you were a philosopher, you were therefore a mathematician and an astronomer. He saw that as all one mode of being. He called on them to solve this problem of the planets. He said, save the appearances, save the phenomena. The word phenomena means appearances. What appears to be a disorder, what appears to be an absurd irrationality in these perfectly ordered heavens, this must be an illusion of the senses, and there must be a deeper, higher order that is mathematical, that is simple, elegant, beautiful, and divine, that is behind this apparent disorder. And that set in motion all these different astronomical hypotheses, theories, and paradigms that climaxed in the Copernican revolution. And Copernicus and Kepler were deeply committed to the Platonic Pythagorean conviction of the divine heavens and the mathematical perfection of the universal mind. And they were also consciously carrying on that challenge coming back from Plato. Now, if you don't take seriously, as an historian of Western thought, science and philosophy, if you don't take seriously Plato's religious conviction, you can't understand the whole history of planetary astronomy that has shaped the cosmology that we live in today. So that's the kind of sensibility that I wanted to bring to the revisioning of the history of Western thought that's in this book and that we'll be doing here. I might also just say that, I wrote this book, about 30 years ago. I mean, the earliest words in it were written 34 years ago, and the last words in it were written 23 years ago, 1989. So I basically wrote it in my 30s. And I have to say, reading this right now, as I am with you, kind of rereading it, is it's like reading a book by someone else that is somehow also very strangely familiar, deeply familiar, deeply in my soul in some ways. I mean, each word I kind of, as one does often with, well, I don't want to say often with one's first book. I try to be that way with anything I would publish, but where you kind of labor over each word and sentence and paragraph until it gets to be just the right, as well as I could say or convey that particular idea or historical reality. But I have to say, it's like reading almost like an intimation of another, another lifetime from another century in some sense, and reading some of the quotes of the reviews and the endorsements on the opening pages reminds me that all this was that the whole PCC program, the faculty, some of whom wrote endorsements for that, or reviews. Sean Kelly wrote a review. He was a Canadian, a young professor in Canada at that point, and Robert McDermott, when he read Passion of the Western Mind, he was a chair of the philosophy department in New York City, University of New York. None of us had come to CIS or form PCC yet, so it's kind of a I don't know, a sort of 30-year revisitation for me, and in a way, when we're discussing this together, well, I don't want to focus particularly so much on the book in our discussions as on the history, but naturally it will come up. In some ways, I'm going to be very much like you in looking at this thing out here rather than being so fully identified with it. One of the things that we can't see or know as we're reading and surveying the history of Western thought, we're looking at almost entirely written evidence. books and manuscripts, letters, but not what we don't have is the kind of living. I mean, that's living, but we don't have the ritual practices that formed and reflected people's worldviews in those earlier eras. We have a bit of it from, like, you can go into a cathedral and hear Gregorian chant, and so you can get a sense for, like, the medieval, the Christian masses and Catholic masses and things like that, Jewish rituals. But thinking of Greece right now, which is our focus for the current class, what we don't have is the music and the dancing. We get a little intimation of it from the tragedies, which were plays that were put on as part of the Dionysian festival. But if you think about, if you think about, for example, how much, if you were to try to understand the 1960s just through the books that were published then and that we still have now available, you'd get a certain flavor, but you wouldn't get what you'd get by listening to the music, or by watching the dancing that took place then. And in some ways, we can almost start to tune. I think events like and ritual practices like Burning Man or raves and that's a whole part of Greek culture that has counterparts to that type of ritual experience and practice that we don't have access to right now, and so it's kind of that we're having to fill in the what we don't get through the books.
Okay. I'm curious how much you recognize the big failure as a part of
How much I recognize what?
just like the past 4 years that we've been through with the economic collapse reflecting one of the big tragedies.
Oh, well, in a way, the economic, the global financial crisis and crash, in some sense, one can definitely see that as, on a particular scale, the hubris of certain kinds of behavior, free market, unconstrained, greedy, hubris in the classic Greek sense. That's a very particular form of it that, Wall Street and America, the financial industry worldwide, et cetera, can be seen as having played that out. But at another level, you could see all of that as being a reflection of a much larger drama that has tragic dimensions to it of this kind, involving the powerful, the tremendous empowerment of the modern human being and modern civilization and Homo sapiens on the earth at the same time that it is climaxing in its power as a species and as a civilization. It has placed its own future and the future of its entire environment into question. That catastrophic dimension to 20th century and early 21st century history is kind of classic Greek myth and tragedy. And I also would agree with Joseph Campbell when he says that for for the ancients, the highest, the ancients and going right up through Dante and Shakespeare, the highest form of, and in many ways, the type of literature, of literary genre that was considered like the most profound and of the highest caliber and the most difficult to pull off, was one in which the tragic dimension was not like simply the end of the story as a kind of pessimistic plaint and elegy, but rather that it was part of a larger unfolding in which the tragic dimension was absolutely essential to some o felix culpa, to use a phrase that we'll see next in our reading this next 2 weeks from the early Christian liturgy, Easter liturgy, where the idea is that we die into life, we fall into love, we lose the womb in order to enter into a new cosmos, and that often involves a sin, an error, a tragic judgment by, often it's the superior human being in Greek myth and Greek tragedy that most calls down the gods upon them. While we're saying something about the gods in Greece, the scholar Lloyd Jones said that the gods treat human beings in the same way that the nobles of an early stage of a rural society would treat the peasants. That's how, it's such a sense of superiority that the gods have over human beings, and just with this is in the myth. I mean, these are, in some sense, human myths, Greek myths, but the Greeks themselves, and Greek humans, would be viewed in the overall tenor of like how Zeus looked at human beings. It was very, very different, as we'll see compared with next week when we're studying the Jewish religion and the Christian religion. The sense of God's love for humanity and humanity's love for God in a way that involves a relationship of great intimacy and like a covenant. You don't see that with the Greeks. When the gods didn't particularly love humanity as a whole. Prometheus was the rebel exception. Zeus was quite negative in so many ways towards human beings, and also human beings tended not to have that sense of a kind of profound affection for their God the way the Jews did for Yahweh. Also, the Greeks didn't view themselves as being chosen the way the Jews did. On the other hand, Athenians seem to love Athena. They had a special connection to Athena, and so, and it is Athens that particularly emerges out of the many polis city-states to play the largest role. You had a question?
But, I mean, this whole relationship that you're talking about...
Be sure to talk loud enough so everybody can hear. I know it's tough.
Stand up and yell. The relationship you're talking about Zeus being so superior to the Greek people, can you more say wouldn't you more say that that's an Aryan perspective when those tribes come in and start taking over Greece? Because the more goddess-centric religions that you're having in Greece prior to that have very close relationships with the people. and they're very much in love with their goddesses, and there's very much more of a, there's a belief that she walks among them literally in corporal form all the time. This whole concept of this separation comes more with the Sky Fathers than comes with the Aryan invasions.
No, I think that's. While the scholarship about the goddess religions, traditions, etc., is very much a work in progress right now, and I am always eager for more. What's the right word? Consensus among the scholars who have devoted their lives to understanding the pre-Hellenic, pre-Indo-European mythologies and so forth. But there's no question that with the, in fact, when we come back after our break, just before we start our full discussion, I'll draw a little diagram here that some of you know already, where we'll kind of show the greater sense of differentiation between the divine and the human, and also the divine and the world that has emerged by the time the Greeks come onto the scene. So we're starting at the beginning of the traditional beginning of Western civilization, but we're not starting at the beginning of, human culture, and we're coming in medias res, into the middle of the thing, and so that's a very good point. And it seems that this state of high differentiation, that the Greeks were so propelled with such great force, is both what gave it a lot of dynamism, power, intellectual potency, but also a tragic dimension in the relationship to the gods and to the divine. And that's also true of the Abrahamic religions. Totally different mythos, but there's a great deal of drama that happens because of that sense of a separation, differentiation compared to the more tribal relationship to, Robert Bellah would say, not to gods and goddesses, that you don't really have gods and goddesses. It's more like powerful beings that one is not so much worshiping as participating in and being possessed. I'm sorry?
Placating.
Right, gods that, rather than being gods that gods or powerful beings can be placated, or there can be attempts at placating, but the way one goes about relating to them tends to be more participatory in ritual, in the tribal consciousness, rather than worshipped in a more separate way in rituals that are coming from the later period, the archaic and ancient period. There's one other thing that I wanted to say here. Oh yeah, this is another thing that I don't go into in this book, but those of you may know, some of you may know about, like with the Eleusinian mystery religions, with the mysteries, and particularly the Eleusinian, they did use some kind of a psychedelic drink, the kykeon, and there's been a very good argument, that a thesis that's been made by Albert Hoffman. It's a book written by Albert Hoffman, Carl Rook, and I'm sorry, Gordon Wasson. That makes that hypothesizes that what seems most likely that the initiates used was a drink that had a psychedelic, a psychoactive component similar to LSD, in that the the rye has a certain ergot quality growth that can have psychoactive consequences if you take it, and it makes a lot of sense for the profound experiences that people had. I think in a much earlier period of human history, you probably had access to what we would call non-ordinary realities more easily because of the permeable nature of human consciousness. You would have been much closer to the dream time, to the underworld, to the invisible dimension, to the spiritual world. I'm using different ways of describing the mysterious dimension beyond the ordinary reality, so that just doing things like dancing, fasting, music, drumming, various initiatory practices could constellate non-ordinary states of consciousness that would have a powerful effect, where you would be experiencing these powerful beings, or later gods and goddesses, in a very vivid way, as vivid as you and I are seeing each other right now. So that's another reason why I think people who have experiences with non-ordinary states of consciousness, whether mediated by psychedelics or some other way, are in a better position to enter into these ancient sensibilities than if you're totally locked into a kind of Cartesian skin-encapsulated ego, to use Alan Watts's term. Okay, I think I'll just maybe just say one other thing that's got an overall point I want to make, and then let's take our break. We'll come back. I'll show a very quick diagram, and then let's enter into our dialogue, discussion about the material. A classical historian named Michael Grant once said that everything that the West retains of ancient Greece was the product of fewer than 50 brains. Okay. And we can name so many of them, like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Galen, Democritus, Thucydides, Herodotus, etc. Now that's true in a certain way, and that helps keep us from, let's say, distorting to the point of idealizing, like just somehow everyone in ancient Greece was sort of a genius. That we're talking about a relatively small number of people, and particularly in a window of time there, in the especially that period in the between the 6th and the 4th century BCE. But this is also a misleading statement to say that it's really 50 brains that we're getting, because those 50 brains, see, in a way that's looking at it as 50 Cartesian billiard balls that are separate from the whole. Those 50 brains are really 50 expressions of a collective psyche and a whole. They're carried by, and they're brought forth by an entire culture and a collective historical development. They're not 50 separate entities that are that's like looking at like 50 potted plants, instead of the fact that these plants are in the soil of of Greece, and it's the larger Greek world. It's not only just that part of Greece, it's the whole, extends over into Italy. That's where Parmenides was, and Pythagoreans were over there. Extends over into what is now Turkey. That's where Thales and Anaximander, they were all over in Miletus, which is right on the Turkish, what is now the coast of Turkey. But that was the leading polis actually in the period of Thales and Anaximander. And then later that position went to Athens. So I'm wanting us to recognize that while we're looking at specific individuals that had extraordinary quality, they were in many ways carried by a whole culture that is having dialogues, discussion. I mean, anything that is written by one of us or created by one of us is not coming out of like this kind of isolated. We're embedded in these communities and relationships that our discussions and our assumptions and the emotional and spiritual zeitgeist that we are breathing day after day is then coming into what we compose, we write, we create in a work of art or a work of scholarship. And none of us is this isolated island. So I'm wanting us to keep that in mind as we look at these remarkable individuals, and at the same time acknowledge that there's an individuality at work too that is admirable in so many cases, that there's a courage that is taken, particularly where you have somebody like Socrates who's standing up against everybody else around him, even to the point of embracing his death, because he was so convinced that death was a avenue to larger life, and that the principles of truth transcended. It would be more important to be true to that higher conviction than to live a radically compromised life. Okay, so let's take a 15, 20, let's come back at 22:05 and we'll begin with our discussion. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing. Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. Okay. you probably have heard the expression, this is a famous sentence from Alfred North Whitehead, the safest general characterization of the history of philosophy is that it's a series of footnotes to Plato. And in a certain way, you can see how true that is already from this rendering of Plato that we saw in Passion of the Western Mind. But the one way I think that we can take that sentence as valid is if we think of the footnotes as being living, autonomous entities and not just mere derivatives of Plato. And in fact, the entire metaphor is a kind of Platonic metaphor in the sense that it's sort of like Plato would be the Platonic idea of the philosopher, and then all philosophy after Plato would be considered to be footnotes to, they would be derivative particulars of the archetypal idea. Okay, and in a way, what we see there is the tension between of Plato's. I wonder if we could just shut this just for a bit. If it gets too warm, I can both turn this fan on in your direction, or we can open the windows. Could you get that one for me too? Thanks a lot, Josh. So you can see in a way the shadow side of the Platonic perspective with that very metaphor. If all of reality is nothing but sort of footnotes to the archetype or the archetypal reality, then that is a depreciation of everything else, of all the particulars, of all the footnotes. On the other hand, if you regard all the particulars not as being diminished by the metaphysical superiority of the archetypal idea, but as being ennobled by the archetype, and particularly as you get into more recent developments of a kind of archetypal Platonic perspective that have come out of the Romantic tradition and depth psychology, you get more the idea of a participatory, co-creative relationship to the archetypal dimension of reality. But in part of Plato's initial experience was so experience of the transcendent was so overwhelming, kind of like St. Paul's experience of God on the horse, getting thrown off the horse on the way to Damascus, that it put into shadow everything else, and it convinced Plato that the true reality was just so beyond the cave of this world that it made this world into something like a world of shadows. Now, what I wanted to just glance at before we move into our discussion is this idea that if this is the kind of primal, forgive me for my approximations of circles here rather than Platonic perfect circles, but if these are worldviews, and here's the primal tribal worldview where the sense of self, of the human self, is embedded in a world that is ensouled, so that the soul of the human is continuous with the soul of the cosmos. And there's a sense of participation, not only of the like the individual in the world, the human being in the world. There's more of a sense of the divine permeating the world, accessible to the human in states of ritual, for example, where one can experience the numinous, powerful being coming right into one. You also have much more of an undifferentiated connection to the rest of the earth community. Animals, mountains, plants, trees can, in states of ritual consciousness, be experienced as entities that can be exchangeable with gods, or with the divine, or with human beings. Like there's much more continuity and interconnectedness, interpenetration of the divine, the human, and the rest of the natural world. Now, by contrast, of course, in the modern worldview, you have a very sharp separation between the subject and the object, and a sense that the objective world is devoid of purpose, the capacities for purpose and meaning, that's a human characteristic, and that spirit and soul are human qualities. Conscious, purposeful intelligence is a human. Perhaps some of the higher primate brains are able to produce it in their complexity, but by and large it's a human phenomenon, while the world itself is a world of objects that the subject of the self is separate from. And where we enter into, in the Passion of the Western Mind, in this story, is that moment when Plato says that the ultimate locus of purpose and meaning and of spirit and soul is in a transcendent dimension of being that is superior to this world. And what happens in the Platonic perspective is, depending on what part of Plato you're reading and how you read him, either this world can begin to empty out of, it becomes like a world of shadows, the body is a prisoner of the soul, and the whole point is to get to a more transcendent, eternal reality that is beyond the material realm, which is seen as really inferior. So you can see that kind of moves towards the objectified disenchantment of the world that constitutes modernity. And he's also doing that with a very powerful development of human intelligence, of human analytical intelligence that helps to create an empowered subject understanding a world as an object. Again, moving towards this modern direction from this more undifferentiated state of cosmic, human, divine interpenetration, the participation mystique. By the way, this is also the individual is more undifferentiated from the tribe too. The identity is much more permeable with the. It's more I am part of the tribe more than I am an individual per se, and that still is present to some extent in Israel, in the polis, where you're identifying more with the city, the polis community, or with the nation of Israel. But there's a powerful movement towards individuation that is starting to happen, creating this individual self, particularly through the philosopher in Greece, the prophet in Israel. And but while in some respects it's pointing towards what is to come here in the modern, with this objectification of the world and differentiation of an empowered, autonomous, individual human. In other ways, it's still close to this primal participation mystique. In fact, the word participation is a word that is comes out of the Platonic tradition. And that sense of the anima mundi, the ensouled world. Anima mundi is a Platonic term. And we'll see, well, you did see when you saw the discussion of Plotinus and Neoplatonism, how it gets formulated in quite specific ways. But to the extent that when I see a beautiful flower, or hear a beautiful piece of music, or fall in love with a beautiful human being, I am experiencing the archetypal dimension, the very principle of beauty itself with a capital B. That is an intimation of this more participation mystique, primal, ensouled worldview that would be negated by modernity. Okay, so I'm trying to show how this is a kind of, it's like kind of halfway in between the primal and the modern, and this is the axial moment, really. With Plato and Platonism, it's the archetypal dimension is transcendent to, this is where eternity is, this is where time is. This is unchanging, this is the realm of change, of decay, of death, of imperfection. This is perfection. Also, this is connected to the heavens. This is connected to the sublunary realm of the terrestrial. This is connected to the body. Well, that's connected to the spirit. With this whole axial revolution, all these dualisms come in, which distinguish between spirit and matter, good and evil, eternity and time, and that permits, and this is just a little footnote, between this and this was a huge development of the archaic, like ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh, or the Mesopotamian world, where you had a kind of you had the highly hierarchical world where the Pharaoh, the king, the emperor, was the embodiment of the divine in this world, and then there's more of a this is moving towards the individuation and the separation of the eternal from the temporal. But when you get to the philosophers of ancient Greece, like the prophets of Judaism, you get a new conviction that the individual, apart from the social political power structure, which was identified with the religious power structure in the archaic world, now becomes one in which the individual can have direct access to a transcendent spiritual reality and criticize the powers that be, and be able to remake the world according to a higher principle of truth. So, like the Hebrew prophets could say, yes, you're a powerful king, but there's a king of kings that I can measure your claims to legitimacy against. And that tradition, which is this axial moment of an experience of a transcendent reality that is separate from this world, including this political, religious, hierarchical world where the compact cosmology has everything locked in together, the political hierarchy, the economic, the religious. With this axial movement, you get a kind of emancipation that the prophet and the philosopher in Israel and Greece, respectively, open up. It's a movement towards the democratization of spirituality, even though it costs a certain differentiation and objectification of the ensouled world. Okay? these four, as Robert Bello puts it, like there's the four great axial civilizations were Greece, Israel, India, and China. And around the same time, each of them brings forth a certain kind of human experience in the form of, for Greece, it's the philosopher. For Israel, it's the prophet. For India, it's the mystic. And for China, it's the sage. And each of those four it represents a kind of individuation, like the individual breaking out of the kind of tribal or archaic community and standing and saying, I've got a direct relationship to a higher reality, a higher truth, whereby in my allegiance to that, I can critique the injustice of how the king is acting, or I can critique the way in which people are talking about and enacting the good in the streets of Athens. I can question that. So I'm trying to describe how it's carrying that balance of shadow and light, and at the same time that you're having this tremendous emancipation of individual intelligence and autonomy, it's also coming with a certain price, but also a great emancipation. And one other thing I might mention about this, I lost the point. It'll come back to me in a minute. But so let's see. I think that's. Oh yeah, the heroic individual. In the tribal consciousness, the heroic individual is not constellated particularly. That's something that starts to emerge in more like where there's chiefdoms, and then very powerfully where there's kingdoms and empires and pharaohs, and then one individual asserts their power and connected to a religious reality. And in Greece, we see in the 90 pages or so that you read there, it's visible even in the first 30 pages, there's a big metamorphosis that takes place in that emergence of the heroic image from a more warrior ideal carried by Achilles. Then it becomes a little more intellect comes in with Odysseus, who's got kind of a Promethean trickster wit and courage, and it's going through, compared with Achilles, where there's this encounter. There's the warrior on the battlefield, and then there's death. With Odysseus, it's death and rebirth. It's death and rebirth. He's like in this other, almost like initiatory engagement with these powerful female figures very often, and is going through a kind of initiation that climaxes in him coming home to Ithaca and the kind of constellation of the sacred marriage. This of the solar and the lunar. You can a very good analysis of this, if you're interested, is of the Odyssey and the Iliad. The comparison, and particularly of the Odyssey, is in Joseph Campbell's The Masks of God. It's a 4-volume work, but it's the volume that's on Western. It's called Occidental Mythology. He's got a very good analysis of that. So you can see a metamorphosis of the hero archetype and of the whole narrative from the Iliad to the Odyssey has already changed. The Odyssey's already taking on a more a new quality, but then a whole nother metamorphosis takes place with Socrates. And Socrates is really becomes, in certain ways, the hero of Western thought. I mean, he's the paradigm figure, the paradigmatic figure. And I very much agree with Robert Bellah in his book, Religion and Human Evolution, when he says that even though Plato is making all these comments against, I actually made a similar point in Passion of the Western Mind, even though Plato is making all these comments against the strictures against the poets and against music, so powerful, it can shape people, affect people in ways that are not good for a society, and so they need to be the arts, the poets. They give distorted views of the gods, etc. So he wanted to exert a kind of control over these, but at the same time, while he's giving all these strictures, he's essentially telling a very powerful literary, poetic drama, a narrative mythos, with Socrates as the hero of that drama, and that has a huge effect on our image of the ideal intelligence in Western thought, one that is morally committed and engaged and is and questioning and encountering the conventional assumptions with courage. You could say, looking back, that the great epochs of the evolution of the Western worldview are all, each one is initiated by a great archetypal sacrifice. And Socrates is the one who is the sacrificial figure who goes through a solemn execution, a trial, execution, a death that in which a birth of a whole new era, a mode of being, a sensibility, an ideal that governs Western civilization from then on, comes out of that solemn trial and execution, death, and sacrifice. And the same thing happens with Jesus, that initiates the powerful Christian impulse in Western civilization. Again, a trial, an execution, a death, a sacrifice for the whole. With modernity, and by the way, you could say with Socrates, as Eric Voegelin said, the Athenians condemned Socrates, but in doing so, the gods condemned Athens. And when you go to the modern period, when we've done Socrates for ancient Greece and the initiation of the philosophical tradition, then you have Jesus as the sacrificial figure for the initiation of the dominant religious tradition in the West. And then with the initiation of modernity and the scientific tradition, it's Galileo. It's who goes through a solemn trial, and instead of a execution, it's house arrest. But there is essentially with that sacrifice, he becomes the hero, the heroic mythic paradigm of the new ideal of the scientific mind that governs modernity. And really there is a full-on death that happens right in that generation. When the Catholic Church, the Pope was friends with Galileo, and Galileo, it's complicated. We'll get to it when we get to that section of Passion of the Western Mind. But I mean, the Catholic Church continued to pay his salary, support while he's under house arrest, etc. So he's getting a very different kind of, sacrificial death. But it is a solemn condemnation. But just 30 years before that, in Galileo's lifetime, Giordano Bruno is burned at the stake. Not specifically for his scientific beliefs, but he was very into the new Copernican cosmology that was interconnected with the beliefs that got him into trouble with the church. And that inquisitional trial of Giordano Bruno that then, that was like 1600 and then 1633, I believe it is Galileo's, you basically have the church making the condemnation, but in doing so, the church condemned itself. I mean, from that point on, the intellectual and moral conscience of Western civilization differentiated itself from the Catholic Church's authority, and very much like when Socrates was condemned by Athens, the gods condemned Athens, not Socrates. And there's the same kind of judgment happened in the zeitgeist against the Catholic Church with the trial of Galileo. So there's this archetypal drama in the background. There always seems to be a sacrifice, a solemn trial by the old authorities that then initiates the new worldview, the new sensibility. Okay, let's open up first anything that's bursting to come through, and then I'd like to invite each of you to share what especially affected you or impressed you or you found notable in the material that we've been looking at. Please.
Well, since you're talking about sacrifice, what would you say is the current sacrifice? Because in a sense, at least from my perspective, I've seen with the beginning of the war on terror in the past 10 years and all this really intense political stuff kind of really coming to surface, and a lot of Americans seeing things differently and having to face larger global political realities and personal realities, and then our economic thing and this whole questioning the basis of our even economic system in general. Are those themselves sacrifices? Are those, I mean, how would you look at that?
There's a lot of sacrificing going on right now.
Yeah.
And a tremendous amount of it is being done by other species. And with the mass extinction of species, and there's no question that there's a huge sacrificial death and potentially rebirth of something, which we don't know. Now, what I was talking about with the sequence of Socrates, Jesus, and Galileo was particularly in terms of the transformation from one kind of dominant worldview to another, the death of a whole way of comprehending the cosmos and of comprehending the human place in the larger scheme of things and the relationship to the divine and so forth. And in that respect, I think that sequence of ancient, medieval, modern, the next step is the postmodern. And the great sacrificial figure was in many ways Friedrich Nietzsche, who in a way he went through like an inner trial, and very appropriately for the postmodern, his dying was a psychological dying into the depth of his own unconscious, into the insanity that finally swallowed him, but not before giving us as powerful and eloquent an opening to, it's really interesting that his two big opponents that he set himself up against were Socrates and Jesus, and the Greek philosophical, Greek rational tradition, and the Christian religious tradition. But he also deeply identified with both Socrates and Jesus. Very interesting figure. And in some ways, Nietzsche's carrying he's carrying everything in him. He's got, you know, he was profoundly grounded in Greek language, culture, philosophy, literature, and ritual. He was deeply, had taken in the Christian religion. Read some of the things that he was writing when he was very young, and how, I mean, he was like just a quintessential. There's this beautiful letter to God that he wrote when he was about 12 years old or so. And his father had died, so you can see, you know, there's psychologically this connection, I think, between the disappeared father and the distant but benevolent God that he's still working with. But anyway, he's taking in, and then he's deeply carrying the modern scientific and modern philosophical enlightenment, also Romanticism. So he's got the whole thing in him. And he's crucified on the cross of all these contradictions and powerful impulses from the Western tradition. And then, this is getting ahead of our story, but since you asked about like who it might be, like, I think in terms of the paradigmatic figure for pointing towards where the postmodern, that in many ways if we take the postmodern not as simply deconstruction, but as the opening wide to many new possibilities, that involves deconstruction as well as an opening to the numinous in new ways, as he did. What happened with Nietzsche is that he has this tremendous romantic crisis and failure with Lou Salome, and out of that crucible of really a kind of psychological ego death on the emotional level, at the same time as he's pushed the nihilistic impulse intellectually to its edge, totally taking in the disenchantment of the modern cosmos. And really, this is where we're looking at a postmodern, you know, the little speck of dust, of meaning-seeking dust in the vast cosmic void. And he's totally taking that in, and then he writes, so this is the postmodern kind of descent into the unconscious and into the vast cosmic void, where the crucible of transformation can take place for a new worldview. And it's right at that moment, 1882, 1883, the crisis happens, and then in January of '83, he says that there was like these 10 magnificent days of, you know, like light, and in the winter of 1883, and he starts writing "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," which almost seems to be coming from a level of archetypal inspiration that has almost biblical numinosity. I've said it in another class that I think Jung's answer to Job is like that in many ways. Nietzsche's "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," William Blake's "The Marriage of Heaven and Hell," and Herman Melville's "Moby Dick." They're all written at that level of like being written at midnight on a mountaintop by the light of lightning in the middle of winter, you know, that kind of intensity. So I see Nietzsche as the crucial figure, and that's kind of why I started the book with that quote from Nietzsche: "The world is deep, deeper than day can comprehend," because he's recognizing that this this great solar transcendent dimension of being that gets introjected by the solar Cartesian modern self has to go down, and that the world's deeper than day can comprehend. That we have to go into we have to take in the wholeness of life, and not just the solar consciousness part of life, the day world. and maybe I'll just end this little gesture towards Nietzsche with that amazing passage. These are the last words that he wrote in the book called Dawn, or also it's called Daybreak. You've got them in front of you. It's the last paragraph of that book, and this is just before he begins his years of wandering, where all the incredible insights started flowing in. And he said, "We aeronauts of the spirit, all those brave birds which fly out into the distance, into the farthest distance, it is certain, somewhere or other they will be unable to go on and will perch down on a mast or a bare cliff face, and they will even be thankful for this miserable accommodation. But who could venture to infer from that there was not an immense open space before them, that they had flown as far as one could fly?" This is so beautiful, where he says, "All our great teachers and predecessors have at last come to a stop. It'll be the same with you and me. Other birds will fly farther." This insight and faith of ours, this recognition that other birds will fly farther, this insight and faith of ours vies with them in flying up and away. It rises above our heads and above our impotence into the heights, and from there surveys the distances and sees before it the flocks of birds which, far stronger than we, still strive whither we have striven, and where everything is sea, sea, sea. And whither then would we go? Would we cross the sea? Whither does this mighty longing draw us, this longing that's worth more to us than any pleasure? Why just in this direction, there, where all the sons of humanity, sons, S-U-N, the solar, where they all go down, where all the sons of humanity have hitherto gone down in the West, will it perhaps be said of us one day that we too, steering westward, hope to reach in India, but that it was our fate to be wrecked against infinity? Or, my brothers and sisters, or, and then that's the last moment of the book, I added the "and sisters." He would have said that now. I feel. And actually, that is the deeply tragic side of Nietzsche's life, is that he didn't have a partner, and his sister was the great betrayer. I mean, she's the one that invited Hitler in. She edited and changed Nietzsche's writings to become proto-Nazi, and invited Hitler to the archives. You know, this is after Nietzsche had died, and so anyway, that's perhaps why he didn't put my brothers and sisters. But Nietzsche didn't have a partner, and he had to do that journey in a sense on his own, and that's why that's why the language is so. He's trying to be heard. Nobody was reading him. He published his own books by himself in the later years. Anyway, so I start both the book and also the course with quotes from Nietzsche, because in some sense he's the person that has taken in this whole development and is now and begins that descent that depth psychology, for example, takes after him. Freud, Jung, the whole descent into the unconscious. Virginia Woolf's born right about the same time that this period that I'm talking about with Nietzsche. Kafka, talk about the trial. Kafka's born right at that point, right when Nietzsche's announcing the death of God, the destruction of the old metaphysical world that had sustained the civilization. So, anyway, anybody else have thoughts and questions? Mac?
Do you think that as
actually the sacrifices of these figures or the mythology about these figures that pulls us into the new?
The question was, do I think it was the sacrifice of the figure or the mythology about the figure's sacrifice that pulls us into the new world? No question about it that it's both. I mean, it requires the. I mean, I think there is an authentic sacrifice that takes place, but if it takes place without a mythos reflecting it and carrying it into the consciousness of the wider culture, then it's the tree that falls without being heard. So this is another reason to do a course like this, is that part of the modern sensibility is to make mythos into a human fabrication, right? Like Joseph Campbell said, could you shut that? Is that where the sound is coming in really loud? It's through the window, or? Yeah, it makes a big difference. Thanks a lot. Joseph Campbell started most of his lectures at Esalen and other places with a quotation that he also has at the beginning of his first big book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. On the first page, it says, "It would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the cosmos pours its inexhaustible energies into human cultural manifestation." Okay, now that's not a modern statement. That's a statement that's coming right out of here. Like the cosmos pours its inexhaustible energies into the human consciousness, and human cultural manifestation is embedded in the cosmic soul. So and Joseph Campbell lives in such a world that the cosmos is ensouled and speaks through myth, and through mythos and archetype. That's the language that the anima mundi speaks, and that's why there can be a communication between human being and world. By the time you get to the modern worldview, you have like a great scientist and religious figure like Pascal will say, "I am terrified by the eternal silence of these infinite spaces." See, it's not the vastness of space that terrifies him, it's the silence. He can't hear the soul of the world anymore. And that's part of the modern condition, which reaches a kind of peak in the 20th century, or a nadir, with, sorry, Ralph, I'm thinking of like the depth of the existentialist isolation. I'm still mad at Ralph Nader for 2000. Sorry, the depth of the existential isolation that happens with that Camus, Heidegger, but particularly Camus and Sartre and Beckett and others convey. That's all contained in the cosmological modern revolution. So that if a modern intellectual were to take Joseph Campbell's statement, see, Campbell's really a romantic, capital R, with a connection to the ensouled world. But if you were to take an Enlightenment, modern, secular, skeptical, objectifying, disenchanted intelligence, that person would say, it would not be too much to say that myth is the secret opening through which the human psyche pours its inexhaustible needs for meaning into the cosmos and projects it onto the meaningless, neutral cosmos in an effort to live in a world of meaning and purpose. That's the modern reconstruction of that. And Nietzsche totally takes that in and goes, wow, the whole, like everybody around me in the modern 19th century is living in a dream. They don't realize that the underpinnings of the whole civilization have been destroyed. and there's going to be a catastrophe in the 20th century because the mythos that was firmly recognized and assumed as reality for thousands of years had been destroyed by the modern mind's critical intelligence. That's what God is dead means. And it's that the metaphysical world has been destroyed by the critical modern mind, and a huge price is going to be paid. And he felt it psychologically, but I think because of the very nature of the death rebirth mystery is that if you go through that nihilistic collapse of meaning in the depths of the dark night of the soul, as he did, there is a spontaneous, I mean, not on demand, but there is a spontaneous emergence of a new, larger, deeper, even more joyful meaning that spontaneously can emerge out of the death, out of the dark night. And Nietzsche tasted it and gave us in Zarathustra many intimations of what that would be about, as have many others since then. So I think the destruction of mythos by the logos of the modern mind has played a crucial role in decontextualizing our existence, and why there is such a sense of being not only alienated but disoriented in the modern self. We don't have a meta-narrative in which everything coheres. It's fragmented. It's up for nothing, and that's one reason why you have like fundamentalist intensity saying, no, I'm going to hold on to this narrative mythos I'll be violent if I have to, because this is my only connection to the numinous, and modernity is destroying that. So there's this violent reaction to modernity by different forms of fundamentalism that say, I'm not going to go on this. I'm not going there. I've had a taste of this, and that's where I'm going to hold on firmly, even if I have to kill you guys.
You keep on referring to the associated aspect of the existential crisis without engaging the freedom aspect, because this very important moment is occurring there, in which that liberation that begins with classical Greek worldview that comes from the rational engagement with the world finds its utmost in the existential crisis, as a praxis, as an engagement, as a way of engaging in the great question.
I'm right. I'm totally with you.
So, and I think we agree.
Yeah. I mean, it's all along the line. Each emancipation is both achieved through a crisis, but also makes possible a new potentiality. For example, with existentialism and with the whole disenchantment of the world, that forces us into the interior in a way that is not necessary if you are living in an enchanted world where everybody around you for generations lives in an ensouled world, and the traditions, the practices, the rituals are just, this is the way things are. But this is required in some sense a kind of deep inner journey that has been very much freeing, and it permits another level of spiritual authenticity if you're not just spoon-fed, as it were, the answers, but you face the situation in an existentially autonomous and uncertain way. The uncertainty is crucial. No, I'm really glad you brought that up, and I've attempted to constantly be juggling these polarities all the way through. first you and then
I think this is very similar to what you guys are saying, but when I was reading the book, so much of what was coming through around the end of the Plato Platonic thought with his impression of the archetypal forms, and then the fall of Athens that kind of happened alongside that. It just felt overwhelmingly similar to where I think we're standing right now, and this is eclipsing kind of, if we were to place Western thought and the whole of it there at the beginning with Plato, and then now where we're standing now and what happens after. I just, along the lines of the nihilism that you guys were talking about, I don't wonder if this is not, in a way, kind of that environment that's void of meaning from which maybe these archetypal forms in the Platonic sense exist, or if that's a stretch.
Beautifully said. No, I very much agree. And when, in a way, and I bet most of you who've read this opening section of on the Greeks probably commented to yourself as you're reading it, like, this sounds very familiar in certain ways. In some ways, the Greeks did the entire trajectory in a couple centuries. You know, the whole shift from mythos to logos, the whole movement from the sacred into the secular, the individuation, the movement towards materialism, towards atomism, towards the autonomous rational subject, but then also the crisis of nihilism, of power and profit being the way the bottom line in the society, and there's a spiritual crisis, and then Socrates comes along, and in a sense takes in. I mean, he's essentially a sophist himself, but he's a sophist with a difference, and we're going to see this over and over again. If people are getting too hot, I'm open to having windows open for the circulation. Again, despite the noise, the military-industrial complex is not quite as attacking us as our first half of the class. We're going to see this over and over again in this trajectory of Western thought, is that there's going to be a crisis that will emerge in which two seemingly irresolvable opposites are clashing. And in this case, it's mythos and logos. It's the whole mythic religious sensibility that had inspired the Greeks and informed them for centuries, up against the new philosophical, scientific, critical intelligence. And I think there's a sentence there right at the end of the chapter called Ideas and Gods, where I said, of special importance for our present inquiry was the effect of Plato's vision on the unstable and problematic condition of the Greek worldview. For by speaking of ideas, that is, archetypal ideas, on one page, and gods on another, in such analogous terms as Plato did, Plato resolved, tenuously yet with weighty and enduring consequences, the central tension in the classical Greek mind between myth and reason. See, he's that's why I started with Plato, because he basically, not only does he set in motion the whole philosophical and in many ways scientific and that side of the high culture of Western civilization, but he's the turning point where he's the paradigmatic figure, the paradigm of how you take religion and science, mythos and logos, and integrate them in a higher synthesis. He does it through a kind of he does it by absorbing the great loss of Socrates. He takes it emotionally, and he spends his life, in a way, working out the death of Socrates, who was his teacher. Let me just say one quick thing about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle that I didn't get until years after years of, suddenly I was looking carefully at their dates of birth and death, and I realized that basically the difference from, like, Socrates was over 40 years older than Plato, and Plato was more than 40 years older than Aristotle. And suddenly I realized this is not like, this isn't like father-son. This is more like grandfather. They're like, it's like a grandparent in their relationship. That, I think, and for example, my closest teachers this lifetime in terms of, you know, intellectually and so, like Stan Groff, James Hillman, they're like 20 to 25 years older than me. But the equivalent of figures, and same thing with Freud and Jung, like Freud is like, you know, 19, 20 years older than Jung. But with Socrates to play, it's over 40 years. I think it's 43 in one case, 42 in the other. And that's, in my life, like that would be like, say, Joseph Campbell or Gregory Bateson, or like that age, that much older than I am, who, when I had them as teachers, they were more like grandfathers, really. It creates a different, I'm trying to describe a different emotional relationship to their teacher than if they were just the very next generation, like just like 20 years older or 25 years older. I know you had your hand up, and is what you wanted to say like right in with this?
It was related to what you're saying.
Please.
Yeah, there was a passage in the text that definitely stood out to me. On 45, it's just a sentence. It says, in the Platonic understanding, the irrational was associated with matter, with the sensible world, and with instinctual desire, while the rational was associated with mind, with the transcendent, and with spiritual desire. And I was thinking about two things, and just how rationality and irrationality to be associated with the transcendent and spiritual desire seems vastly different to how I understand rationale now, being linked to logic and reason. And so just how this language that we still use today in a different context is so completely different.
Yeah.
And two, how we understand, how we rationalize the rationality of spirit and transcendent is very interesting to me.
It's a complicated move, and I think you're pointing towards some of the, how we have to when we think of Plato and his commitment to what's been called the noetic revolution, that is the revolution by which noetic is like, you know, not knowing, and the revelation that the cosmos is has an intelligent order, and that the human mind at its most developed could perhaps access and recognize and be elevated by the beauty of that transcendent order through knowing. That it's more of a romantic, capital R as well as small r, I guess, view of the intellectual quest than, by the time you get to modern reason, it's become procedural. It's dried out. It's instrumentalist. It's not an emanation from the divine mind. Okay, so you have another point in there that I think will come out to in time. Please, you're impatient.
Yeah, I was just curious if you could clarify the difference between the mind and the logos, and then also
Between what and logos? Oh, the nous and the logo? Oh, yeah.
And also, like how, if you saw the ancient Greek conception of the logos differ from the Stoic, and sort of how the logos just basically developed.
Yeah. that would be really an entire dissertation could be written on that exact set of questions, logos, nous, and then how logos shifts. And we'll see, for example, next week, well, we don't come here for 2 weeks, but in the course of the next readings for the next week and the following, we'll see how that word logos, which originally means word or story, narrative, in that sense as well, but it has to do with like the word, but it eventually starts taking on this quality of representing an intellectual order, which then overlaps with the word nous, which meant mind in Greek, and really the two terms become almost interchangeable as time passes in that worldview in which the very nature of the highest dimension of reality is seen as being rational in a spiritually profound way. That goes straight through to Hegel, by the way, his whole idea of the German word Geist means both spirit and reason, mind, and that ambiguity goes back to Plato. But next week we'll see that it's when the Hebrew understanding that God's word is it's creative. God's word is creative and redemptive. God says, "Let there be light," and there's light, and it was good. Just saying it, the word, and the word that is translated in the Hellenistic period from the Hebrew, the word that is translated into Greek from the Hebrew is logos. In the beginning was the logos. Christ becomes the logos, and so the great Platonic and Stoic principle of logos and the Hebrew understanding of the divine as logos meet, and the person who Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher, is one person who recognizes that. He's a contemporary of both Jesus and Paul. And then whoever wrote the Gospel according to St. John, who writes in the beginning was the Logos, invokes this kind of Platonic Stoic terminology to characterize the sense of the Godhead. And then that gets played out in Neoplatonism with Plotinus, where the second, the son of the ultimate, the child of the ultimate, is the second person of the Trinity, as it were, in Christianity, is seen as the Logos. And similarly, St. Paul was deeply influenced by Stoic understandings. He grew up in a town in the Roman Empire that was a Stoic academic urban world, and that was very much in the air. And you can see it in a lot of his ethics, but also that conviction of the Logos as ruling the cosmos with sovereign wisdom. He's pulling it in from the Stoics. So I think doing a fine differentiation, I give a few, I think, suggestions as to how, like, nous comes in through Anaxagoras, for example. And when Plato's talking about the the sun as being the embodiment of the divine reason, that and the symbol of it, the reflection of it. The word reason that we use in English, he's using as nous, N-O-U-S. Well, transliterated N-O-U-S. So, but a more elaborate, I remember being very interested in this question myself, because it seems like really so much pivots on logos, nous, and how that evolves. It would be, if anybody who wants to write a paper on that, that would be a great topic. Matthew.
I'm wondering, in this diagram, the description of the evolution of the Western mind, if you see any, or if you've considered whether there might be a kind of archetypal possession state at work in the history of Western thought, and how you would describe that.
Very much. Like that sense of the hero archetype that got conflated with a certain image of man is, in some sense, a kind of archetypal being that, I mean, in popular philosophical reflections, works, things like the Ascent of Man that people are watching in Brian's course. All that is it's a kind of being that it's a mythos that is our worldview. That sense of progress, for example, that was such a conviction of the modern civilization from in the Enlightenment, for example. Progress is something that the heroic human being, man, is achieving through his autonomous intelligence and his emancipatory impulse towards greater and greater freedom, power, and self and realization of the self in larger and larger horizons. Okay, it's a very vivid sense and of the human project, and I mean, this is just totally my. I don't want to say it's totally my personal mythos, but it's certainly my conviction, and I don't want to mistake it for being reality itself. But my sense of it is that since this whole mandalic spiral is basically it's a classic kind of self-archetype mandala in the Jung sense, self, capital S. It's an image of the whole. And in that case, you often see, like Jung talks about how when a person's gone through severe fragmentation in a kind of shamanic descent or a shamanic illness or a spiritual emergency, that kind of dark night of the soul, where the whole personality is fragmented and so forth, that the sign of the emergence of a new coherence and of a new center of identity in a larger horizon of being is that in the spontaneous drawings or in dreams, there is that mandalic structures, patterns start to appear of the four, of the circle and the square together, the balancing and synthesis of opposites, simultaneously dynamic and static at the same time. Like there's a kind of spiral. There's a dynamic spiral at the same time as there's a balanced symmetry. And my sense is that the universe itself, if we can speak of it as a kind of personify it as a whole, the universe has in some sense constellated out of itself a form of consciousness that would differentiate, or that was differentiating itself from the whole. with all sorts of prices that are paid for that, because it's a fall from the garden. It's a loss of the cosmic womb, and yet that's the only way in which a true partner can emerge, is for that separation to occur, and also for the cultivation of, through conscience, of moral responsibility and recognizing one's shadow, that one is done wrong, caused suffering, sinned against the whole, out of a narrow elevation of the part. And so from that point of view, one could see this as being a kind of archetypal process of initiatory transformation, which a kind of journey has been undergone by a whole civilization. And our focus in this first reading has been on that stage that the Greeks represented. I love the different, if you read like Homer, and for those that don't read Homer in the ancient Greek, which that describes most of us, read a really good translation. I love the translation by Robert Fitzgerald of Homer's Odyssey. He also did a great one of the Iliad. But I remember, in studying Greek in high school under the Jesuits, you're really trying hard. You're doing your best to get the translation right. And then towards the end of my senior year, I picked up Robert Fitzgerald's translation of the Odyssey, and it was just like that great poem by Keats about opening up Chapman's Homer. It was like entering into another mythic world. It was a revelation. And if you read something like that translation, you get a sense for how, in some ways, heaven and earth seem still closer together for the Greeks. And that's why that they had a kind of primeval clarity about their sensibility. And the mythic was so present, the gods, the poetry, the history, the philosophy, when you read Sappho, it's just unbelievable, her lyrical poetry. The tragedians, there's nothing like them except for Shakespeare that's at their level. This kind of primordial creativity that seems to be coming from the cosmos itself is emerging at that point, and it's a dawn. We always say, like, the dawn of Western civilization, or the dawn of the Greek mind, that kind of thing. It's the beginning of I think, a kind of solar heroic journey with all the shadow and problematic and tragic dimensions, as well as epic and potentially, I think, redemptive qualities. But I think we have been through a kind of possession state, and one of the things that Passion of the Western Mind attempts to do is to read that history informed by depth psychology, because depth psychology comes at the right with the postmodern. Comes in. It's a 20th century phenomenon, late 19th century, and it not only is a necessary compensation for the one-sidedness of the rational enlightenment, reconnecting to the depths of psyche, it also gives us a tool by which we can look back on the whole and see it in a new way. And I think in some ways you could say that one reason we can see things the way we can now, and is that a death is happening, a profound death of a whole mode of being, of a kind of a form of civilization. In a way, a whole form of Homo sapiens is undergoing a profound death and potentially transformation and rebirth. And depth psychology gives us that lens through which we can see these deep sort of mythic, symbolic, archetypal beings and narrative, powerful narratives that have in some sense been running the show from the unconscious at the same time as we've been giving our all at the conscious level. The two work together in this mysterious, paradoxical way. But if we don't bring consciousness to crucial moments such as the one we're in right now, it's the consequences can be very destructive. So that's why I think it's so important to allow that kind of, to nurture that kind of illumination that the psychological perspective gives. And one last thing from Nietzsche, he recognized that he was not just a philosopher, he was a psychologist. And he said, every philosophy is a confession. Every philosophy is a confession. And this, what we're looking at is a recognition of a deep subjective unfolding that perhaps is rooted in, like not a potted plant, but a plant in the soil, in the universe itself, constellating this drama, and depending perhaps on our bringing our best to this moment, because we're not just on automatic. We're miraculously conscious, autonomous agents of imagination and will. Okay, great. See you in 2 weeks in Namaste Hall, and read the next section. I think it's part 3 and 4. Thanks for putting up with the tremendous amount of environmental stimuli the first half.
First one. Does Plotinus get some of his thinking from the Brahmins of India?